So firstly, let's just go through a brief history about our past, relationship with sex and what did we learn along the way when it came to sex. Who wants to start?
Oh, Stefan.
Oh, geez. Okay,
Wow.
You're
Under
on.
the bus.
I feel like I'm a good start, to be fair. You know what? Look, what did I learn? What is my experience? My experience, geez. The amount of, as you guys know, I've had a number of relationships in my time, right?
You have, yes.
And with that comes a lot of different partners, a lot of different loving relationships, some also not, and a lot of intimacy, both physical and emotional. You really kind of identify what is it in a relationship that is what matters, what is crucial, And I think in my experience over time, I kept pondering that. It only got harder and harder because all I was doing was the same thing, rinse and repeat with no adaptations, what if I did try something new, it wasn't that far from, much of a deviation.
Yeah.
And the problem was, I found that out of my experience, it all was almost a waste in the essence that I was taking for granted what was meant to be, in a loving relationship, as well as what sex was about and all these different things. So, my experience has been a bit of a tough one. In that, a lot of relationships. So I'd go from partner to partner, trying to figure out what love is.
The usual.
Yeah, of course. And a lot of broken hearts along the way, mainly from, me doing it to them. And that's always a heartbreaking thing to do with, to be honest. It hurts both parties terribly. But the biggest thing I found as well is my epiphanies from sex, because I just kept having it as well with relationships, but also outside of that. And man, what you find out is how pointless it is without its true meaning, which is love. Now, I'm going to leave it there simply because I think as it goes, it's just going to divulge a bit more about what that all means.
The layers of this onion will continue to uncover.
My experience, a lot of relationships, a lot of sex, and it just led me down a pit, so to speak. So I'll leave it there for now. I'll pass it over to you guys.
May as well go upscale from here.
Yeah. It's it's been an interesting life, I would say overall, in terms of certainly around relationships. Had a lot of relationships when I was younger as well, quite serious ones. Had a very long-term relationship at one stage, and it more or less was, how do I put it? It was like a quasi-marriage in some aspects.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of aspects where you're more or less living life with one another, except it lacked the touches, right? It lacked the commitment. It lacked marriage. It lacked purpose of togetherness. And that without that union, it never meshed. Now, where that divulges, at least in terms of sex and in terms of all other aspects of my life and certainly in terms of thoughts around marriage, is it took over a lot of the relationship. It misguided the relationship a lot of times in the sense that I realized communication was sacrificed for sex. When we should be talking about something, maybe we've got an issue, instead you would sleep with one another instead of speaking to one another.
Do you know what that actually, sorry, do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of this episode in How You Met Your Mother when it's like Barney and, I can't remember what her name is.
Robin
are together, and whenever they had a problem, they'd have ways to get around it. And it was like every time Barney got mad about something she did, she just starts stripping, and that's their way to get over, a bad situation. Let's go have sex. Back to you.
Yeah, it's a good point though, because you look at the dangers of such situations and you realize, and this will be discussed quite predominantly throughout today, I'm sure, but the foundation blocks are being built wrong. In modern relationships, in our past relationships, it's all being built off an idea that sex is love. And
That's right.
sex is not love. Sex may be a representation or an example to someone that you love them, but it's not love. And without it being in loving union and in commitment in relationship, it becomes something that is really not meant to be, right? So I'll keep it short for the moment
because we have
because
quite
there's
a bit to talk about.
there's plenty to discuss.
It's like
It's one of those topics.
Yeah, and the thing is, the first question is like one of those, like, it'll be fleshed out.
Yeah, it definitely will. Okay, well, mine was, pretty much similar to yours, Stefan. Not as many girlfriends, of course, but sexual partners, quite a few. And it's for nothing. The more and more sex I had, the worse I felt. Like, it was very strange. It was like God was speaking to me before I even came to him. Like, it's very, very crazy, especially in the more recent, time frame of it. So practically only one prior long relationship in the past, and that only was about 3.5 years long. That actually was very big on what you said. Sex isn't love, but to me at that age, sex was proof of love. Very, very diluted and incorrect.
Misguided.
Yeah, very misguided. Very misguided. Right?
That's our society, though.
Yeah.
It's
true.
propagated so much.
It is.
It's the lie that society tries to tell young people.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's just not true. And that's probably one area where young people do things that later they think, why did I do that?
Yeah. It's guilt, and that's the thing, right? That's why there's so many provisions on sex by God, because it's the psychological
Exactly.
issue, a number of other things. But that's
we'll be
one of
talking about that today. That's for sure.
yeah, big time. Yeah,
Beautiful. Okay. Well, I think that's pretty. That's it for me. I mean, I don't really need to go any further from there.
it's interesting because that guilt. Another guilt. You said something earlier about
Yeah, I felt worse the more I did it.
Well, that's the thing, and that's how I felt as well. Was like as I did it more and more, the meaning of the action of sex had lost its meaning.
Yeah, there was something inside that was. It was like rotting or emptying. It was a very strange and deep wrong feeling. Eventually, it got to a point, and I'm like, "There's something really, really wrong here," and I don't know what it is, but I know what I need to. What I do know I need to do is to stop having sex. That was the number one thing I knew I needed to do, and then from there, it also went into pornography. Stop all of that, and that was is God preparing me like already prior to like my calling, right, and prior to your calling as well. You did the same thing. You're in a relationship, so it didn't make a difference.
You said it to me like a few months ago. It was funny because I remember laughing about it. It was like, it's like we just it's not something you do anymore. It almost feels weird. It's more weird to do masturbation or watch pornography or these things as opposed to the opposite now. Whereas back in the day, it was like, you don't masturbate. It's like, wow, that's a bit like, it's like, okay, man, like how, but
as it's spoken about in Romans, you are a slave to sin. You're a slave to sex. You're a slave to immoral actions. When you come to Christ, you're no longer a slave to sin and those actions. Now you're free in life with Christ.
Yep.
And you feel that when you come in, because it's probably maybe one of the most prominent questions that people ask me throughout the days, particularly when they hear that I'm Christian. They hear that, yes, I've got a partner, but do you sleep with each other? And I'll say, no, there's, we're obviously going about things in the manner that we can. We want to build our foundation correct. We want to ensure that we're communicating, that we understand where one another want to go, how we want to instill Christ in our relationship, and so on. And the one point that people make to me, it's probably the number one comment, which proves that point where you're a slave to sin, you're a slave to sexual action, because they say, "Oh, I could never do that."
Oh yeah,
and the fact they've just said it proves that point. Now, we've all been there and we've all thought very similar points. So, the big point to be made is, it's not the case. You can find life and you can find fruit of life outside of that.
Yeah.
Do you know what the scary thing is though? And it's on a psychological scale, and the idea that, because it's so societally accepted now, the human condition of, your body, it's an urge, you got to get rid of it, you just got to take care of it, that's the societal expectation.
Yeah,
it's
that's
okay
right.
to be a slave to your urges and your desires.
It's natural.
Exactly.
It's natural. You're supposed to get these, and you're supposed to get a release. It's not healthy if you don't, right?
It's a bad mentality, and as you come to Christ, you realize that's just not the case. Hence, Romans.